Chapter 1. The Healer's Legacy. The air in the lab tasted of damp earth and crushed lavender. Seraphine ran a soil-stained thumb over a delicate, silver-leafed sprout. Control. That's what this was. A world of neat labels, of predictable growth cycles, of logic she could literally cultivate between her hands. Everything had its place. The belladonna went here, the wolfsbane over there. She catalogued each one with a steady hand, her mind a quiet fortress of facts and figures. Her grandmother's journals lay open on the oak bench, the faded ink a testament to a different kind of knowledge. The moon petal blooms only when the veil thins, she'd read, a small scoff escaping her lips. Folklore. Pretty words for things science hadn't bothered to name yet. Following this train of thought, she heard the heavy door creak open. Julian stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and city politics. He smiled, a perfect, polished thing that never quite reached his eyes. "Still playing in the dirt, my love?" His voice was a smooth melody, but the notes felt rehearsed. Seraphine wiped her hands on her apron, a faint smudge of dirt left on her cheek. "It's called botany, Julian, and this dirt will be the foundation of Havenwood's new trade agreement." He chuckled, stepping closer, his expensive leather shoes looking ridiculous on the stone floor. "Of course. Always practical." He picked up a jar of dried petals. "Our union will be the same, a practical alliance. You, the beloved daughter of Havenwood, the brilliant healer, and me, the man who can connect our town to the capital." He set the jar down. "It's a perfect design, isn't it?" "A design?" she echoed, her gaze drifting back to the journals. Her life felt like one of her grandmother's pressed flowers. Beautiful, preserved, but utterly devoid of its wild essence. "Yes, perfect." "Good." He leaned in and kissed her cheek, a dry, proprietary gesture. "Don't be late tomorrow. The city delegates are particular." He paused at the door. "Oh, and the council mentioned some animal trouble again, on the forest's edge. Probably just a displaced bear. Nothing to worry about." He said it so easily, a problem already solved in his mind, simply because he had named it. He wanted a perfect partner, a perfect town, and a perfect future. Seraphine knew she had to be that partner, because her entire community depended on it. She had to bury her doubts, because doubt was a weed that could choke the most carefully planned garden. After Julian's polished presence had faded from the room, a profound silence settled, deeper than before. The lab, usually her sanctuary, suddenly felt small, confining. Her fingers traced the elegant looping script in her grandmother's journal, the words a silent song of a world she refused to believe in. "The healer's blood calls to the wild. It sings a song only the lost can hear." A pretty, tragic sentiment, nothing more. She had always dismissed these passages as the ramblings of a woman steeped in superstition, a woman who couldn't accept the cold, hard truths of biology. Still, a strange impulse guided her hand. She turned a page, one she'd skipped over 100 times before, its edges brittle with age. Tucked between the descriptions of a poultice for fever and a balm for aching bones was a single, pressed herb. It wasn't faded like the others. It couldn't be. A soft, pearlescent light pulsed from its petals, a gentle, impossible rhythm like a sleeping heart. It was too vibrant, too alive. She reached out, her fingers trembling, just a little. The moment her skin brushed against the petal, a wave of warmth shot up her arm, tingling and alien. It felt like a whisper, a greeting from a world she swore did not exist. The fortress of her logic suddenly had a crack in its foundation, and a single glowing question mark was beginning to push its way through. Chapter 2. A Whispering Forest. The decision to enter the forest the day before her wedding was not logical. Seraphine knew this. Nevertheless, she found herself walking beneath the ancient canopy, the air growing cool and heavy with the scent of pine and decay. She needed one last ingredient for the ceremonial incense blend, a rare moss that grew only in the deepest parts of the woods. That was her stated reason, the neat label she placed on an urge she couldn't explain. The truth was, she needed to escape the suffocating weight of silk and promises. She needed to breathe air that didn't taste of political maneuvering. Here, the world was supposed to be simple: cause and effect, photosynthesis and decay. Consequently, the forest was not cooperating. An unsettling quiet hung between the trees, a silence where the usual chatter of birds and squirrels should have been. The wildlife was agitated, she noticed. A doe darted across her path, its eyes wide with a terror that seemed too large for the peaceful woods. Seraphine paused, her hand resting on the rough bark of an oak. A low, guttural growl echoed in the distance, so deep it seemed to vibrate in her bones. A bear, she told herself, just like Julian said. A big one. But the sound wasn't just angry. It was pained, desperate. She pushed deeper, her leather boots sinking into the damp earth, because she was not a woman who backed down from a shadow. This forest was her home, her extended laboratory. She knew its secrets, or so she thought. She saw a patch of nightshade with berries swollen to an unnatural size, their color a venomous dark purple she'd never documented. A line of mushrooms grew in a perfect unsettling circle, their caps weeping a thick black sap. These were not simple mutations. They were signs of sickness, a blight her science couldn't name. Her calm, ordered mind began to fray at the edges, a prickle of intuition, an emotion she despised, crawling up her spine. Then, she found it. Her grandmother's secret clearing, a place whispered about in the journals. And there, pressed into the soft mud near a stream, was the print. Her breath hitched. It was a paw print, massive and clawed, far too large for any bear. The shape was canine, like a wolf's, but a wolf the size of a pony. The claw marks were not just indentations, they were gouges, deep and violent, as if the creature had been racked with a terrible spasm. The scientist in her wanted to take measurements, to make a plaster cast, to categorize the impossibility. But the woman standing in the eerie silence of the woods, she just felt a profound and primal fear. What kind of creature walks these woods? What kind of pain was it in? As she hurried back towards the town, the first lights of evening winking through the trees, she passed a small group of elders huddled near the path. Their voices were low, worried whispers carried on the breeze. "The omens are clear," one said, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. "The moon seer hasn't been seen in a generation," another added. "Something is coming for the unclaimed." Seraphine picked up her pace, pulling the collar of her cloak tighter. Superstitious nonsense. All of it. She repeated the words like a mantra, a desperate attempt to rebuild the walls the forest had begun to crumble. Yet, the image of that monstrous paw print was burned into her mind, a terrifying, illogical fact that refused to be dismissed. Chapter 3. The Lost Relic. Back in the safety of her sunlit room, the forest's unease felt like a phantom limb, an ache she couldn't place. Her wedding dress was laid out on the bed, a river of ivory silk and delicate lace. It was beautiful, a perfect costume for the perfect bride. It felt like a stranger's skin. Seraphine ran her hands over the smooth fabric, the contrast between its pristine surface and the memory of mud and fear making her stomach twist. She needed to focus, to push away the growls and the impossible footprints, to be the woman Julian and Havenwood needed her to be. Her duty was her shield, her logic was her sword, and her future was a path already paved. In an effort to ground herself, she turned to something familiar, her grandmother's old traveling chest. It was made of dark, fragrant cedar, its surface covered in faint scratches from a life of adventure Seraphine could barely imagine. She'd always loved the chest. It was a solid, tangible piece of her past. As she ran her fingers along the inside lining, searching for the familiar scent of dried herbs, her nail caught on something, a loose piece of wood, a flicker of curiosity. That dangerous, untamed emotion made her pry at it. With a soft click, a false bottom sprang open, revealing a hidden compartment she'd never known existed. Her heart gave a strange, uneven thump. It wasn't just a secret space. It was a hidden world. Lying on a bed of faded velvet were more journals, smaller and bound in dark leather, their pages filled with a cramped, urgent script that looked nothing like her grandmother's elegant hand. And next to them was the locket. It was silver, intricately carved with swirling patterns that seemed to shift and move, like smoke trapped beneath the metal. It was no simple piece of jewelry. It felt ancient, heavy with a power her scientific mind immediately tried and failed to dismiss as mere weight and temperature. She picked it up. The metal was cool against her skin, a shocking, pleasant cold. Then it began to warm. Not a gentle warmth from her own body heat, but a deep, penetrating heat that emanated from within the locket itself. It was a living warmth, pulsing with a faint, steady thrum against her palm. It felt like holding a small, captured star. This was impossible. Metals don't generate their own heat. Lockets don't have a heartbeat. Every law of physics she had ever studied screamed that this was a trick of the mind, a hallucination brought on by stress. But it felt more real than the dress on her bed, more honest than the promises she was about to make. What was this? Why was it hidden? Just as the question formed, a sound shattered the quiet intensity of the moment. The first deep, resonant chime of the church bells rang out across the town square. Loud, insistent, final. The sound ripped through her, a summons to a future she suddenly wasn't sure of. In her hand, the silver locket pulsed, a single, sharp, undeniable tremor of energy. A response. The bells were calling for the bride, and deep in the woods, something else had just heard a call of its own. Chapter 4. The Unclaimed Bride. The scent of 1,000 white lilies was suffocating. Seraphine moved down the aisle of the grand church, a ghost in an ivory dress, each step a carefully measured beat in a song she hadn't written. Her face was a serene mask, her resolve a thin layer of ice over a deep, turbulent sea of doubt. Beneath the silk of her gown, the silver locket rested against her sternum, no longer warm, but a dead, cold weight. She saw Julian waiting at the altar, his smile a beacon of political triumph. He was her future, a safe harbor, a logical conclusion. The whole town watched, their faces blurred into a single entity of expectation. This was her duty. This was her design. Therefore, when the ancient oak doors of the church burst inward, splintering from their hinges, the sound was a violent tear in the fabric of her reality. A gasp ripped through the crowd. It wasn't a man who stood there, framed by the sudden, harsh sunlight. It was a beast. A creature from the darkest parts of the forest she had just fled. A wolf of impossible size, its fur the color of obsidian, matted with dirt and something dark that looked like dried blood. Its movements were wrong, a jerky, pained gait. But its eyes were lucid. They were the color of molten gold, burning with a feverish intensity, and they were locked entirely on her. Panic, pure, animal panic, erupted. Screams echoed off the high stone ceilings. The thing ignored them all. It let out a guttural snarl, a sound of profound agony, and launched itself forward. A blur of black fur and desperation. It didn't attack the crowd. It didn't attack the priest. It launched itself directly at Julian. He shouted in surprise as the beast slammed into him, sending him sprawling to the marble floor. Before anyone could move, a sound of cracking bone and tearing flesh filled the air. The wolf convulsed on the ground, its form twisted, elongating, its fur receding into pale, sweat-slicked skin. In its place stood a man. He was huge, wild, his body a roadmap of scars and raw power, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. He was clearly suffering, his face contorted in a mask of pain, but he pushed himself to his feet. He swayed, a tremor running through his massive frame, and pointed a trembling hand directly at Seraphine. His voice, when it came, was not a shout, but a raw, broken growl that scraped the air. "She is mine." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was not a claim of ownership. It was the desperate plea of a dying animal. Before the shock could even register, before Julian could scramble up, before the town guard could draw their swords, he was on her. He grabbed her arm, his grip a manacle of feverish heat. It didn't feel like a kidnapping. It felt like a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. The silver locket beneath her dress flared with a sudden, searing heat, so intense it felt like it was melting into her skin. He was dragging her away from the altar, out of the church, away from everything she had ever known. And the world dissolved into a ringing silence, leaving only the burning on her skin and the impossible gold of his eyes. Chapter 5. A Desperate Bargain. The pristine silence of the deep woods was a shocking contrast to the chaos of the church. He dragged her through tangled undergrowth, his strength a terrifying, unstoppable force. For a long time, Seraphine was nothing but a doll in his grip, her mind a numb void of shock. The beautiful ivory dress was tearing on thorns, the hem already stained with mud. The life it represented, her orderly, predictable, logical life, was being shredded with it. But then, the numbness cracked. A cold, sharp fury unlike anything she had ever felt surged through her veins, because she was a scientist, a healer, and not a victim. As a result, she dug her heels into the dirt, wrenching her arm. "Let go of me!" The sound of her own voice, sharp and commanding, broke the spell. He stumbled to a halt, turning on her. The feral intensity in his gaze made her breath catch, but she held her ground. Now, away from the panic, she could truly see him. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man consumed by a sickness. His skin, stretched taut over muscle and bone, had a feverish sheen. A strange, terrifying network of black veins pulsed just beneath the surface of his neck and arms, like poison spreading through him. His breaths were coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But another instinct was rising to meet it. Stronger, sharper. The healer's instinct. "You're dying?" she said. The words were not an accusation, but a clinical diagnosis. The statement seemed to shatter what little control he had left. A wave of dizziness hit him, and he slammed a hand against a tree to keep from falling. A low growl rumbled in his chest, his body convulsing as if fighting an invisible war from within. The wolf was trying to get out. Or maybe it was trying to die. He forced out words, each one a shard of glass. "Blight," he gasped, pressing his forehead against the rough bark. The bond. It chose. He looked at her then, his golden eyes pleading, filled with a desperate, horrifying clarity. "Need you. Healer." He needed her. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't stolen her out of malice, but out of a desperate, primal instinct for survival. He was powerful, yes, terrifyingly so. But right now, his power was killing him. He was vulnerable. And in his vulnerability, she saw an opportunity, an escape, a way to reclaim the control that had been ripped away from her. The path wasn't through struggling or screaming. It was through the one thing she understood better than anyone: science, medicine, a deal. Seraphine took a steadying breath, her voice coming out clear and cold, a scalpel in the chaos of the woods. "I am a botanist, a healer. What you're describing, this blight, I can analyze its symptoms. I can try to find an antidote." She took a deliberate step closer, holding his agonizing gaze. "I will help you. I will go with you and I will help your people, but you will give me your word. When it is done, you will bring me back to Havenwood, unharmed." It was an insane proposal, a bargain struck with a creature from a nightmare. but she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, a desperate latching onto the one thing that made sense. He stared at her, the man and the beast warring in his gaze, before he gave a single pained nod. The impossible agreement hung in the air between them, a fragile thread woven from his desperation and her logic. Chapter 6. Crossing the Threshold. The bargain was struck, and so she followed. Cale, he had finally managed to gasp out his name, led her away from anything that resembled a path. The forest began to change around them, the familiar oaks and maples of Havenwood giving way to gnarled ancient trees that seemed to lean in and watch them pass. The air itself grew thick, heavy with the unfamiliar scent of damp stone, wild musk, and herbs so potent they made her eyes water. Her scientific mind, her shield, and her sword scrambled to keep up. She tried to memorize the turn of a creek bed, the shape of a peculiar rock formation, anything that could serve as a landmark for her eventual return. But the woods twisted and turned, deliberately disorienting, as if the landscape itself was trying to swallow her whole. Eventually, they arrived at a sheer rock face, a dead end of granite and moss. There was nowhere else to go. Seraphine's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Was this a trick? But Cale didn't hesitate. He reached out and pushed aside a thick, heavy curtain of ivy that was so old it had become one with the stone. Behind it was a fissure in the rock, a dark, narrow opening that breathed a gust of cool, earthy air. An entrance, a way into the hidden heart of the world. This was it. The point of no return. The threshold between everything she had ever known and everything she had ever dismissed as impossible. He looked back at her, his golden eyes asking a silent question. He wasn't dragging her anymore. He was waiting. She stood at the precipice of her old life, the memory of her wedding dress, of Julian's perfect smile already feeling like a story someone else had told her. Was she a captive being dragged into a cave? Or was she a healer, stepping forward to honor a desperate bargain? The choice, she realized, was hers, because a true captive would never be given a choice. She lifted her chin, took a deep, steadying breath, and stepped past him into the darkness. The moment her foot crossed the invisible line, pain, searing and absolute, shot up her arm. A cry was ripped from her throat as she stumbled forward, catching herself against the cold cave wall. She looked down at her wrist. A mark was blooming on her skin, glowing with a soft, silvery light before settling into the flesh. It wasn't a brand or a tattoo. It was an intricate scar, delicate as a web of frost, forming itself out of nothing. Her horrified gaze snapped up to Cale. He was leaning against the opposite wall, his teeth gritted, a low hiss of pain escaping his lips. He clutched his own forearm. And there, on his skin, was a perfectly matching silver mark. What did you do to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He just shook his head, his face pale. But before he could answer, a wave of profound exhaustion washed over her. It wasn't just tiredness, it was a physical drain, as if a tap had been opened somewhere deep inside of her, siphoning away her own life force. She felt dizzy, her knees weak, her very spirit feeling lighter, thinner. She was connected to him now, not by his grip or by a bargain, but by this horrifying, luminous scar. And she understood with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the bond was real, and it was already demanding a price. Chapter 7. A World Undone. The cave tunnel opened into a hidden valley, a secret paradise cradled by impossibly high cliffs. Waterfalls cascaded down moss-covered rock, feeding a river so clear Seraphine could see the smooth-colored stones on its bed. The air was sweet with the scent of unknown exotic blossoms. It was beautiful, a place of impossible, breathtaking peace. This beauty made the horror it concealed all the more grotesque. The camp was a scattered collection of hide tents and lean-tos, a makeshift settlement clinging to the edge of the river. And it was filled with the dying. From this beautiful place, a symphony of suffering arose. A constant low growl of pain was the backdrop to everything, a sound that settled deep in Seraphine's bones. Some of the werewolves lay on pallets, their bodies twitching with uncontrollable spasms. Others paced restlessly, their eyes wide and rabid, their movements jerky and unpredictable. A few just sat and stared into nothing, their faces hollow, as if the blight had already devoured their souls from the inside out. The smell was the worst part, a cloying mix of sickness, sweat, and something acrid, like burning herbs. Her scientific mind, her only defense, kicked in. She started categorizing, observing. Symptoms include neurological decay, uncontrolled shifts, extreme aggression, and eventual catatonia. It was a way to put a wall between herself and the overwhelming despair of this place. A man with tired, gray-streaked hair and a jagged scar across his brow approached them. This must be Cassian. He nodded to Kyle, his eyes filled with a grim respect before turning his gaze to Seraphine. It was a look filled with skepticism and a sliver of desperate hope. Kyle gestured toward a small tent. "Start there." His voice was strained. He was pushing himself to his absolute limit, and she could feel the effort it took, a faint thrum of exhaustion through their bond. She walked over to the tent and knelt beside a young woman, no older than 20, who was shivering despite the warm air. Her eyes were glazed over. When Seraphine gently placed a hand on the girl's forehead to check her temperature, a jolt went through her. It wasn't a shock of static. It was a wave of pure, undiluted emotion, so powerful it buckled her knees. Despair. A bottomless, crushing grief. A sense of failure so immense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. But it wasn't her own. The feeling was alien, a violent intrusion into the sanctuary of her mind. She gasped, snatching her hand back from the girl. Her head whipped up, her gaze frantically searching the chaotic camp. And then she saw him. Kyle was leaning against a massive pine tree across the clearing, his eyes shut tight, his face a mask of agony. He was watching the sick girl, and through the bond, she had felt the full force of his grief for his dying pack. The connection wasn't just a scar on her skin. It was an open door to his soul, and right now his soul was a world of unending pain. Chapter 8. The Wolf's Whisper. Following the horrifying intrusion of his emotions, Seraphine did the only thing she knew how to do. She built a fortress of logic and went to work. Control was her comfort. She had Cassian help her clear a larger tent, creating a makeshift infirmary. She organized her herbs, what little she had brought, into neat ordered piles. She sterilized knives with boiled water and tore strips of linen for bandages. For a few precious hours, she could pretend she was back in her lab. She could pretend this was a problem that could be solved with tinctures and poultices. This was a necessary illusion, because facing the truth of her situation was simply too much to bear. The blight, however, did not care for her illusions. It was a relentless, insidious enemy. She made a calming balm from chamomile and silver leaf and applied it to the skin of those suffering from tremors. It did nothing. She brewed a potent tea from willow bark to combat the fevers. The werewolves couldn't even keep it down. Every tool in her scientific arsenal proved useless, like throwing pebbles against a fortress wall. Frustration, hot and bitter, rose in her throat. She was a healer. Her knowledge was supposed to be a weapon. Here, it was nothing. This world did not follow her rules. Just as the sun began to dip below the cliffs, painting the valley in shades of orange and purple, a cry went up from the center of camp. Kale collapsed. He fell to his knees before pitching forward, his body racked with a violent shudder. The pack froze, a collective gasp of terror rippling through them. Seraphine ran, her own exhaustion forgotten. She knelt by his side, pressing her fingers to his neck. His pulse was a frantic, thready rhythm, and his skin was burning with a terrifying heat. The black veins on his arms were pulsing, dark and angry. She was out of ideas. Her knowledge had failed. All she had left was a desperate, useless anger. In that desperation, she pressed her palm to his forehead, a useless gesture of comfort. and the bond flared to life. But it wasn't Cale's pain she felt this time. It wasn't his despair. It was something else. Older. Wilder. A presence deep within him, ancient and powerful. A voice that didn't use words filled her mind, a series of images and sensations. The stone that bleeds iron, the root that grows toward the darkness, not the light. The pale flower that weeps a glowing sap under the full moon. The voice was pure instinct. It was raw, untamed knowledge. It was his wolf. It was showing her a botany that didn't exist in any of her books, a kind of primal alchemy. She felt a surge of something. Not hope, exactly, but a direction, a path forward through the darkness. "Cassian," she called out, her voice sharp with a newfound purpose. "Listen to me very carefully. I need you to find something." She trusted it. She didn't know why, but she trusted the whisper in her mind over a lifetime of scientific certainty. She applied the strange, dark poultice she created from the bizarre ingredients. As the paste touched Cale's skin, the violent pulsing of the black veins slowed. His breathing, though still ragged, deepened. It wasn't a cure. She knew that. But it was a shield, a temporary peace. And the knowledge had come not from her logical mind, but from the heart of the very magic she had sworn to deny. Chapter 9. A shared past. A shared fear. The moon rose high above the valley, a silent silver witness to the quiet suffering of the camp. Kyle slept, the first real rest he'd had in what felt like an eternity. Seraphine sat on a stool beside his cot, a bone-deep weariness settling into her. The bond was a constant low-level hum beneath her skin, a quiet siphon draining her energy, her vitality. It was a parasite, and yet it had also been her guide. This contradiction was a new and unsettling landscape she was forced to navigate. Her entire world had been built on a foundation of absolute truths, and now every single one of them had been turned to sand. Carefully, she reached out to reapply the dark, fragrant poultice to his chest. Her fingers, stained with sap and dirt, brushed against the shimmering silver scar that mirrored her own. The moment she made contact, the bond surged, not with pain or a desperate plea, but with a soft, melancholic pull. It drew her in, under the surface of the present, and into a memory. His memory. She saw it all through his eyes, a field of brilliant red wildflowers under a summer sun, a woman with hair the color of flames, her laugh a bright, beautiful sound that made his heart ache with joy. He was happy. He was whole. Then the world tilted. The scent of flowers was replaced by the coppery tang of blood. The beautiful laugh became a choked, terrified scream. There was a flash of silver, the glint of a blade coated in wolfsbane, and a surge of agonizing, soul-tearing loss that was so profound it stole Seraphine's breath. The vision shattered, leaving her gasping, her own heart aching with a grief that was not hers to carry. It was too much, too raw. As the echo of his pain faded, she felt a shift in the bond, a current flowing the other way. Cale stirred, his brow furrowed in his sleep. And she knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that he was feeling her. He wasn't seeing a memory. He was feeling the core of her being. He felt the cold, suffocating terror she had buried for years, her fear of chaos, of losing control, of the wild, unpredictable emotions she kept locked away behind walls of logic and duty. He felt her deepest, most secret vulnerability. His eyes fluttered open. The wild, feverish haze was gone. In its place was a clear, weary sorrow that seemed as ancient as the mountains around them. He looked at her, and in his gaze, she saw a perfect reflection of her own shock and horror. He knew. He had felt her fear. She had tasted his grief. They were strangers, bound by a violent, impossible magic. Yet, in that moment, they knew each other's deepest wounds. He slowly, weakly, lifted his hand. His fingers didn't touch her face or her arm. They reached for her wrist, his thumb gently tracing the outline of the silver scar that marked her as his. It wasn't a gesture of ownership. It was a silent, solemn acknowledgement. I see your pain. I know your burden. And in that single devastating touch, the nature of their bond shifted from a curse to a shared sentence. Chapter 10. The Draining Cost. A fragile rhythm had settled over the valley. Days bled into a routine of grinding herbs, boiling roots, and tending to the sick. Seraphine worked from sunrise until the moon hung high and white in the sky, her life measured in doses and bandages. She moved with a purpose that left no room for fear, no time for the ghost of a life she'd left behind. The pack, once a sea of suspicious, feral eyes, now watched her with a cautious reverence. She was their healer, their only hope. This new role was a heavy cloak, but it was also a suit of armor, protecting her from the terrifying chaos of her new reality. Consequently, the armor was beginning to crack. The bond, the source of her new intuitive knowledge, was also a relentless parasite. A constant humming drain pulsed from the silver scar on her wrist, leaching the strength from her bones. Sleep brought no rest. Food tasted like ash in her mouth. A persistent headache throbbed behind her eyes, and at times the world would shimmer and blur at the edges. Her hands, once so steady, had developed a faint tremor. While grinding a crucial set of roots, her focus wavered for a single fatal second. Her hand slipped, sending a cascade of the wrong powder into the mixture. It was a simple mistake, easily rectified, but it sent a spike of cold terror through her. Her precision, her mind, the very essence of who she was beginning to fail her. One evening, Cale found her slumped over her workbench, her head in her hands, the flickering lantern light casting long, skeletal shadows across the tent. He had been growing stronger each day, the dark veins receding, his movements losing their pained, jerky quality. But as he healed, she withered. She felt his presence before she saw him, a familiar wave of concern and a deep, gut-wrenching guilt that flowed through the bond. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His touch was warm and solid, a stark contrast to the cold exhaustion that had settled deep inside her. This has to stop. His voice was a low rumble, rough with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity. It was a raw, self-loathing anger. I am getting stronger, and you are fading away. I can feel it. He knelt in front of her, his large frame suddenly seeming vulnerable. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking the silver scar that bound them together. The bond. It thinks I am dying. So it is taking everything from you to keep me alive. But I am not dying anymore, Seraphine. You saved me. His golden eyes, clear and filled with a terrible resolve, met hers. We can break it. I can sever the connection. She stared at him, stunned. Break it? It will be difficult, he admitted, his voice tight. My wolf may not survive the shock, it could kill me, but it is better than watching you waste away to nothing for us. The offer hung in the air between them, a sacrifice of such magnitude it stole her breath. He would die for her. This wild, impossible man would die to give her back a life she wasn't even sure she wanted anymore. Chapter 11. A Grandmother's Secret. Cale's offer echoed in the hollow spaces of Seraphine's exhaustion. Die for her? The thought was absurd, a tragic romantic notion that had no place in her world of facts and figures. Yet it haunted her. It forced her to look beyond the immediate struggle for survival and ask a more dangerous question. What was she truly fighting for? Seeking answers, she turned back to the journals she'd taken from her grandmother's hidden chest. These were different from the others. The script was frantic, filled with strange alchemical symbols and desperate, sprawling notes. She had been looking for a cure to the blight. Now, she was looking for a way to survive the cure. As a result, she dedicated every spare moment to deciphering the cryptic pages. She used her scientific training to find the patterns, to see the logic hidden beneath the veil of mysticism. She recognized the herbs the wolf had shown her, sketched here with an obsessive detail, but they were part of far more complex and disturbing formulas. The journals spoke of a blood alchemy, a power inherent in her family's lineage, a power her grandmother called not a gift but a healer's burden. A terrible, chilling pattern began to take shape, a dark reflection of everything she thought she knew. Her work became an obsession, because the alternative was to accept a fate she could not control. She found the final piece of the puzzle late one night, hidden in a section of the journal that appeared to be blank. As she leaned closer, a drop of blood from a small cut on her finger fell onto the page. The blood didn't soak in. It sizzled, and a hidden script, written in a stark red-brown ink, bloomed across the parchment. Her blood was the key, and the truth it revealed shattered her world. The formula wasn't a cure. It wasn't a remedy. It was a weapon, an elegant, horrifyingly precise tool of genocide. The combination of specific herbs, when mixed with the blood of a healer from her lineage, didn't just fight the blight. It permanently severed a werewolf's connection to their primal spirit. It would trap them in their human form forever, stripping them of their strength, their healing, their very identity. Her family members weren't just healers. They were wardens. Her stomach churned. This was the power Julian wanted. This was the legacy that flowed through her veins. At the bottom of the page, a final, chilling message was scribbled in a different code, one her grandmother had taught her as a child for playing games. They think me dead. Good. Havenwood's alliance is a cage. The Moonseer was a lie created to control both our kinds. I will not be a weapon. I fight from the shadows now. Her grandmother was alive. The woman she had mourned, the woman whose legacy she had tried to uphold, had faked her own death. The lies. All of it. The weight of the betrayal was crushing. Just as this horrifying new reality crashed down upon her, a scream of pure primal rage ripped through the mate bond, a wave of fury so powerful it felt like a physical blow. It was Cale, and it was a warning. Chapter 12. The Unveiling. Before the echo of the mental scream could fade, Cale burst through the flap of her tent. The air crackled with his fury. "They're here," he snarled, his eyes blazing with a dangerous golden light. "On the northern ridge, a small party." His voice was low, a predator's growl. It wasn't an army. It didn't need to be. Seraphine knew, with a certainty that felt like ice in her veins, that it was Julian. They moved like shadows to the edge of the valley, concealing themselves behind a barrier of ancient, moss-covered stones. She saw them then. A handful of men in the dark uniforms of the city guard, and Julian, standing apart, observing the valley with a cold, detached curiosity. He wasn't preparing for an attack. He was setting up an experiment. One of the guards produced a strange device, a metal box covered in intricate dials and wiring. He activated it. Seraphine heard nothing, but the effect on the pack was immediate and catastrophic. A low whine seemed to fill the air, and the werewolves stationed nearest the ridge cried out in agony. It was a sound that went beyond pain, a note of pure torment that drove them mad. The device amplified the worst symptoms of the blight. Wolves who had been stable suddenly convulsed, their bodies contorting in violent, uncontrolled shifts. They turned on each other, their eyes glowing with a rabid, mindless fury. It was a horrifying spectacle of chaos and suffering, a vision of hell unleashed in their hidden paradise. And Julian watched it all with the dispassionate air of a scientist observing rats in a cage. He wasn't trying to kill them. He was proving a point. He was creating evidence for his belief that they were nothing more than savage, uncontrollable animals that needed to be put down. The entire raid was a performance. Then his true cruelty was unveiled. His men, moving with practiced efficiency, fired nets to trap one of the frenzied wolves. As the creature thrashed and snarled, Julian himself strode forward, calm and composed. He held a syringe filled with a dark, viscous liquid. Without a flicker of emotion, he injected the concentrated form of the blight directly into the trapped wolf's neck. The creature's scream was horrifying, a sound that would haunt Seraphine's nightmares forever. It broke free from the net in a final agonizing surge of strength and tore through the outer camp before collapsing, its body still twitching. As Julian and his men retreated, their sick demonstration complete, Seraphine and Cale fell back into the relative safety of the camp. The chaos was already subsiding, leaving behind wounded bodies and shattered spirits. The choice was gone. The path back to her old life was a field of ash. She turned to Cale, her face pale, her eyes blazing with a cold, hard fury that mirrored his own. "He knows," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a solemn vow. "He knows everything. About my grandmother, about my blood." She looked at him, the healer and the scientist in her forged into something new, something dangerous. "He isn't trying to manage a disease, Cale. He is trying to commit an extinction." Chapter 13. A partnership forged in fear. The knowledge of what her blood could do was a poison. Seraphine stood before her cluttered workbench, the scent of herbs and crushed roots a familiar comfort in a world that no longer made sense. Her grandmother's journals, filled with the horrifying secrets of her lineage, lay open. She could follow that path. She could become the weapon Julian wanted, the final, elegant solution to his werewolf problem. The thought was a cold, dead thing in her chest. Or she could forge a new path. She could take the intuitive magic whispered to her through the bond, filter it through the logic of her science, and create not a weapon, but a true cure, a choice. Her choice. Consequently, she threw herself into the work with a singular, desperate focus. This was a task far beyond mixing poultices. It was a delicate molecular dance. She had to isolate the regenerative properties of the wolf's spirit, amplify them, and create a serum that would fight the blight without harming the host. The process required her to draw on the bond, to open her mind to the wild, chaotic whisper of Cale's wolf, and then use her scientific precision to translate that magic into a stable, usable form. The work was a constant drain, pulling at her vitality until her skin grew pale and translucent, and dark circles bloomed like bruises beneath her eyes. But a fierce, defiant resolve burned away the exhaustion. Cale was her shadow, a silent guardian who rarely left her side. He watched her, his guilt and awe a constant, warm pressure she could feel through their shared connection. He saw the life force she was pouring into this impossible task, a sacrifice she was making for a people who were not her own. He brought her food she forgot to eat and blankets when the night chill made her tremble. He was no longer just a captor or a patient. He was a partner. Late one night, as she worked to stabilize a particularly volatile compound, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The tent spun, and her knees buckled. Before she could fall, his strong arms were around her, holding her steady. He guided her to a small stool, his touch surprisingly gentle. In the quiet intimacy of the lamplit tent, the walls he had built around his own pain finally crumbled. "Her name was Alara," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. He told her everything. He spoke of Julian's political ambition, of a trade dispute deliberately engineered to create conflict. He described the trap, a silver-lined pit meant for him, and how Alara, his first mate, had taken his patrol that day. He spoke of his own blinding rage, a grief so profound it had left a crack in his soul, a weakness that had allowed the blight to creep into his pack and take root. His guilt wasn't just for her death, it was for the plague he believed he had unleashed upon his people. Seraphine didn't offer comforting lies or easy absolution. She simply listened, her presence a quiet, unwavering anchor in the storm of his past. When he finished, a heavy silence filled the tent. She reached out, not to his face, but to his forearm, her fingers tracing the silver scar that bound them. In that moment, it didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a bridge, a shared path forged in fear and grief. As her fingers rested on his skin, a soft, warm light pulsed from the single vial on her workbench. The cure, it was stable. She had done it. She looked at Cale and saw a flicker of the same light from the scar on his arm. Their bond, born of violence and desperation, had just been reforged into something else entirely. An alliance. Chapter 14. The Betrayer's Shadow. A shadow passed over the valley the next morning. It was a hawk, but it flew with an unnatural purpose, its path a direct line toward the camp's edge. It dropped a small, leather-wrapped cylinder into the undergrowth, before wheeling and disappearing back toward the distant peaks. The message was not for the Alpha. It was for his second. It was for Cassian. He retrieved it when no one was watching, his hands trembling as he broke the seal. The note was from Julian. The words were few, but their meaning was as sharp and deadly as a shard of glass. A crude drawing of his family's home, circled in red, and beneath it, a simple, brutal command: destroy the cure, or I will destroy them. Tucked inside the cylinder was a single golden lock of his daughter's hair. As a result, a war ignited in Cassian's soul. He was a beta. His loyalty to his alpha, to Kale, was a sacred, unbreakable vow. But he was also a father, a husband. The thought of his family, who he believed were safe and hidden, now in Julian's grasp. It was a poison that spread through his veins, colder and more vicious than any blight. He watched Seraphine, her face pale with exhaustion but shining with a triumphant resolve as she worked to replicate her success. He saw the hope she was giving back to his people, and he knew he had been ordered to extinguish it. All day, a sour, churning anxiety emanated from him, a discordant note that Seraphine could feel through the heightened senses of the pack. She watched him, a flicker of unease in her heart. Night fell. The camp was quiet, the sick resting more peacefully than they had in months. Cassian moved through the shadows, his face a stone mask hiding the raging tempest within. His loyalty to his pack versus the love for his family. His honor versus their lives. Julian was forcing him to make an impossible choice. He reached Seraphine's tent, the vial of the cure glowing with a soft, promising light from within. His hand was on the tent flap. All he had to do was trip, to stumble and send the delicate vial crashing to the floor. An accident. A terrible, tragic accident. Just as his fingers tightened on the canvas, a vision, violent and unsolicited, ripped through his mind. It was an echo from Kale, amplified by the raw power of the pack bond. A flash of fiery red hair, the scent of wildflowers and blood. A woman's scream cut short. He felt the soul-shattering agony of his alpha's loss, a grief so complete it brought him to his knees. He realized with sickening clarity that this was the very same pain Julian was threatening to inflict upon him. He would not become the monster who created that agony for another. He could not. Shaking, his resolve broken and reformed into something new, Cassian stumbled back from the tent. He went directly to the Alpha's fire, where Kale and Seraphine sat in a rare moment of quiet companionship. He fell to his knees in the dirt before them. "He has my family," Cassian choked out, the words tearing from his throat. He confessed everything. Julian's demand, the message, and then the older, darker secret that had haunted him for years. "He did this before," he whispered, his voice cracking, "with Alara. He threatened my family then, too. I told him which route she was taking. I led her to that trap." The confession hung in the cold night air, a devastating betrayal laid bare at the feet of the man he was sworn to protect. Chapter 15. Trapped and Exposed. The confession shattered the fragile peace of the camp. Betrayal, years old and freshly delivered, hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Kale stared at Cassian, his face a mask of cold, quiet fury. But before he could speak, a horn blew from the watchtower, a frantic, desperate blast. The sound was a death knell. Julian was done with subtlety. He was attacking. This time, there was no pretense of an experiment. It was a direct and brutal assault. The high-frequency sonic devices blared from the cliffs, sending waves of agony through the pack. But this time, they were followed by soldiers. They swarmed into the valley, armed not with swords, but with silver-laced nets and rifles that fired tranquilizer darts. They weren't here to kill, they were here to capture. Their attack was cruelly precise. They bypassed the stronger warriors, their main force striking directly at the heart of the camp, the infirmary tent where the sick were recovering and the sheltered den where the pack's children were hidden. Chaos erupted. Kale and the healthy warriors fought with a desperate, primal ferocity, but they were caught off guard, their efforts divided between fighting the invaders and protecting their vulnerable. Seraphine worked frantically, trying to shield her patients, her precious vials of the cure clutched in a desperate hand. She watched in horror as soldiers dragged away werewolves weakened by the blight, their struggles futile. She saw them swarm the den, emerging with crying, terrified children in their arms. Among them was Cassian's family. The assault was as quick as it was devastating. Just as suddenly as they had appeared, the soldiers retreated, dragging their captives with them. They left behind a scene of wreckage and despair. As the pack tried to regroup, a low humming sound filled the air. A drone, a metallic insect from the city, hovered over the center of the camp. A speaker crackled to life, and Julian's voice, calm, smooth, and dripping with condescending victory, echoed off the cliffs. "Seraphine, my love, a truly valiant effort with your little project. But sentimentality was always your grandmother's weakness. I, on the other hand, am a pragmatist." The words sent a chill down her spine. "Oh, yes. I know all about her faked death. I've been tracking her little resistance for years. I know all about your bloodline's true potential." The drone lowered, releasing a small, leather-bound book that fell to the dirt at her feet. It was her research journal from her lab in Havenwood. "This is your final choice," Julian's voice continued. "Bring me the rest of your grandmother's work and your unique talents. Help me finish what your family started, or these loved ones I've borrowed will be my first test subjects." The drone whirred and shot back up into the sky, leaving a profound, horrifying silence in its wake. They were trapped, exposed. Their families were hostages. Kale fought to stay on his feet, the lingering sonic vibrations weakening him. Seraphine stood frozen in the ruins of her infirmary, clutching the single, fragile vial of the antidote. It was the only weapon they had left, and it wasn't nearly enough. Chapter 16. The Blight's Embrace. The attack left a scar on the valley, a gaping wound of fear and loss. The wounded were tended to in a grim silence, every shared glance a reminder of the empty spaces where their captured loved ones used to be. A profound and terrible quiet had replaced the camp's usual hum. But the true enemy wasn't Julian's soldiers. It was the lingering echo of his sonic weapon. The high-frequency waves had deeply unsettled the blight, causing it to flare up in the sick and the recovering alike. And none suffered more than Kale. The blight, which had been in a fragile retreat, surged back through him with a terrifying vengeance. As a result, Seraphine saw the black veins crawling back up his neck, darker and more aggressive than before. His body was slick with a feverish sweat, and a low, pained growl rumbled constantly in his chest. His mind, the one she had come to know through the bond, was a storm of pain and confusion. She had one vial of the cure, one single, precious dose. It was meant to be a template, the key to saving them all. But there was no time. The pack needed its alpha. She needed Kale. It was a desperate gamble, a choice made in the heart of chaos. With Cassian's help, she held him down and injected the shimmering silver liquid directly into his bloodstream. For one beautiful, breathtaking moment, it worked. A soft silver light pulsed from the scar on his arm, and the black vein seemed to recoil, fading back into his skin. His breathing evened out, his eyes cleared, and for a fleeting second, he looked at her, truly saw her. Hope, fierce and brilliant, flared in her chest. But then, the hope was extinguished. The blight, as if enraged by the attempt to banish it, roared back to life. It adapted, overcame. It devoured the cure and used its energy to fuel its own monstrous growth. The black veins exploded across his skin. Cale screamed, a sound of such profound agony it was no longer human. His body convulsed, bones snapping and reforming in a grotesque, accelerated shift. This wasn't the fluid, powerful transformation of a werewolf. It was a corruption, a perversion. He didn't become the majestic wolf she had seen in the forest. He became a beast, a hulking creature of corded muscle and gnarled fur, its eyes glowing with a mindless, rabid red light. It was a creature of pure, unthinking instinct, a vessel of the blight's rage. It roared, a sound that shook the very mountains and thrashed against the hands holding it down. As the beast's roar echoed through the valley, a different kind of pain ripped through Seraphine, a searing, tearing agony at her wrist. She cried out, clutching her arm. The silver scar, the constant humming source of their connection, flashed with a blinding, white-hot light, so bright it hurt to look at. And then it went cold. The warmth, the connection, the constant whisper of his presence in the back of her mind vanished. It was like a string had been cut, a door slammed shut in her soul. The bond had snapped. He was gone. And she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Chapter 17. The Devil's Bargain. The valley had become a tomb. A profound silence reigned, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind and the occasional enraged roar from the fortified cave where Cale's beastly form had been contained. Seraphine sat on a cold stone, her entire world shrunk to the size of the dead, gray mark on her wrist. The scar was no longer a shimmering silver. It was a dull, lifeless gray, like old ash. It was a brand of her failure. The connection that had been a curse, then a guide, then a partnership was now just nothing. An empty space that ached with a phantom pain. She had tried to save him, and in doing so, she had lost him completely. In the midst of this despair, the low hum returned. The drone descended from the sky, hovering before her like a metallic specter. Its single black camera lens felt like a judging eye. Julian's voice, impossibly smooth and rational, emerged from its speaker. He didn't sound triumphant. He sounded reasonable, sympathetic even. "A noble failure, Seraphine," he said, his tone soft. "You tried to save the animal, but the disease was simply too strong. I understand your compassion. It is, after all, your most admirable quality." The words were a gentle poison, designed to soothe and manipulate. He wasn't the monster from the raid. He was the charming fiancé from her old life, the man who always had a logical solution. "But your methods are inefficient," he continued. "You are trying to cure a forest fire one tree at a time. It's sentimental, not practical." Then, the air in front of the drone shimmered, and a holographic video projected into the space between them. The image was stark and horrifying. It was the captured pack members, Cassian's mate and child, huddled together in a cold, sterile cage. The others growing weaker, the black veins of the blight becoming more prominent on their skin. They were suffering, and they were dying. "You see?" Julian's voice was now a surgeon's scalpel, precise and devoid of emotion. "You cannot save them like this, but we can. Together." The image of the prisoners vanished, replaced by a diagram of her own blood cells. "I'm offering you a different kind of mercy," he said. "A solution. Bring me your grandmother's research. Bring me yourself. We will perfect the neutralizing serum. We can end their suffering. Permanently. No more pain, no more monstrous transformations. Just peace." He was offering her a devil's bargain, cloaked in the language of her own science. He was twisting her identity as a healer into that of an executioner. He was asking her to commit genocide and call it mercy. "It is the only logical choice, Seraphine," his voice concluded, as the drone's camera zoomed in on the tear-streaked face of Cassian's daughter. "The most compassionate thing we can do now is give them a peaceful end." The drone powered down, its hum fading into the oppressive silence. It left her alone with the horrific offer, the images of the suffering prisoners burned into her mind. And in the desolate wasteland of her grief and failure, a terrifying thought began to take root. What if he was right? Chapter 18. Dark night of the soul night fell on the valley like a shroud. The moon hid its face behind a thick veil of clouds, leaving the world in a profound, starless darkness. The only sound was the wind, a lonely voice that whispered of loss and failure. And from the mouth of the sealed cave, the occasional guttural roar of the beast that was once Kale served as a monstrous broken heartbeat for the dying camp. Seraphine sat alone amidst the wreckage of her work, the useless herbs and shattered vials a perfect metaphor for her own shattered purpose. The dead, gray scar on her wrist was a constant, cold accusation. She stared at the dark entrance to the cave. Her scientific mind, the bedrock of her entire existence, saw only an irreversible biological decay. The blight had won. Her intuitive power, the frightening, wondrous magic she had reluctantly begun to trust, had betrayed her. Her cure had become a catalyst for destruction. She had poured her own life force into saving him, only to create a monster and lose him forever. She was a failure as a scientist, a failure as a healer, a failure as a mate. Every identity she had ever held, old or new, lay in ruins around her feet. Julian's offer slithered through the cracks in her broken resolve. A merciful end. The words were a twisted echo of her own goals. As a healer, wasn't her primary duty to alleviate suffering? The prisoners in his cages, the sick lingering in the camp, the beast trapped in the cave, they were all in agony. Her methods had failed. His offered a clean, permanent solution. It was a monstrous logic, a genocidal calculus, but in her despair, it presented a perverse kind of order in the face of unbearable chaos. Was this her true purpose? Was her grandmother's legacy not to heal the wild, but to tame it? To destroy it? The questions were a poison, and she had no antidote. She felt a profound, crushing loneliness that was deeper than just being without Kale. The bond had been severed, and with it, her connection to this world. She was an outsider again, a scientist observing an alien species, but now without her armor of detachment. She had made a choice to leave her life, to embrace this wild, fated love, and it had demanded everything from her only to end in this empty, silent darkness. In the depths of her despair, her gaze fell upon a glint of metal amidst the clutter she'd salvaged from her things. It was her grandmother's silver flask. A simple, elegant thing, with intricate carvings of vines and moons. She had always dismissed it, assuming it held nothing more than strong spirits for a lonely traveler. An old woman's comfort. But now, in the oppressive darkness, the silver seemed to catch a light that wasn't there. The carved moons seemed to glow with a faint internal luminescence. The flask, once a symbol of her grandmother's perceived foolishness, now felt like the only thing in the entire valley that held a secret. It felt like it was waiting for her. Chapter 19. A Grandmother's Final Gift. Despair was a quiet, insidious poison. It had seeped into the marrow of Seraphine's bones, leaving her hollowed out and brittle. She picked up the silver flask, the metal cool and solid in her trembling hand. It was a tangible link to a past she no longer understood, a final, useless trinket from a woman of secrets and lies. She expected nothing from it. And it was this lack of expectation, this final, weary surrender, that allowed her to see. The intricate moons carved into the silver seemed to pulse with a soft internal light, a phantom glow in the oppressive darkness of the tent. It was a silent invitation. With numb fingers, she unscrewed the ornate cap. The flask was empty. Of course it was. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips, a final, empty promise. But as she tipped it over, a small weight shifted inside. It wasn't the slosh of liquid. It was a dry, rattling sound. She shook it, and a tiny, tightly wound scroll, sealed with a single drop of dark red wax, fell into her palm. Her heart, a slow, sluggish thing in her chest, gave a single, hard thump. The wax seal crumbled to dust at her touch, and she carefully unrolled the parchment. The script was her grandmother's, but it was imbued with a strange urgency. The message was short, a riddle, a key. To claim power, one must first claim self. The purest cure is born of sacrifice, not depletion. The words meant nothing, and yet they meant everything. She read them again, and then a third time, the fog of her despair beginning to thin. Depletion. The word was a physical blow. It was the constant, siphoning drain of the bond, the slow fading of her own life force. That was the path she had been on. Sacrifice. The word brought Cale's face to her mind, his agonized offer to break the bond, to die for her. That was the path he had offered. Both led to ruin. But the first line. To claim power, one must first claim self. It was not about choosing between her life and his. It was about integration. It was about embracing all the parts of herself. The meticulous scientist, the skeptical botanist, and the intuitive, magical healer. A brilliant, blinding flash of understanding lit up the darkness of her mind. Her cure had failed because she had treated the bond as a one-way street, a passive drain. She had tried to create something to fight the blight, to deplete herself to save him. But the message implied a different kind of alchemy. The cure wasn't a weapon to attack a disease. It was a catalyst, a way to stabilize and then amplify the bond's power, turning it from a siphon into a circuit. It required a willing sacrifice, a conscious and active claiming of the bond, a merging of their life forces, not a theft of one by the other. A surge of adrenaline so powerful it made her gasp, burned through her. It was a wild, impossible hope, but it was rooted in a logic she finally understood. Her power wasn't for genocide. It wasn't a weak tool against a relentless plague. It was the key to creating balance. She looked at the dead gray scar on her wrist, a mark of severance and failure. Then she looked toward the cave, where the beast that was Cale roared in its mindless agony. She had lost the bond, but with this new, terrifying knowledge, she had just found a way to take it back. Chapter 20. Forging the Future. Hope was a fire. It burned away the last vestiges of her despair, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. Seraphine was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was a strategist. She moved through the broken camp, her purpose a tangible thing, drawing the weary, frightened eyes of the pack. Her first stop was the mouth of the cave where Cassian kept his lonely, guilt-ridden vigil. He looked up as she approached, his face a roadmap of grief. She didn't offer him absolution. She offered him a weapon, a chance for redemption. She showed him the scroll, her voice low and steady as she explained her impossible theory. Not a cure that fought, but a catalyst that joined. A ritual that would require her to willingly step into the heart of the blight, anchored by a bond she would have to rebuild from nothing. He stared at her, his haunted eyes slowly widening. He saw the scientist in her words, the cold logic of her plan. But he also saw the healer, the fierce, unwavering belief in a power beyond science. He saw a leader. He rose to his feet, the first spark of his old beta strength returning to his gaze, and gave her a single, sharp nod. He was with her. Because of this renewed alliance, the camp transformed. A quiet, desperate energy replaced the fog of mourning. They had a new mission. Seraphine returned to her wrecked infirmary and began to work, her hands now steady, her mind brilliantly clear. She wasn't just recreating the antidote, she was re-engineering it. Every ingredient was chosen with a dual purpose, one scientific, to stabilize Cale's biology, and one magical, to act as a conduit for the ritual, a key to unlock the severed bond. Her knowledge of botany and the wolf's intuitive whispers finally merged, working in perfect, elegant harmony. Meanwhile, Cassian gathered the few warriors who were still strong enough to fight. He laid out the plan, his voice resonating with a newfound authority. Theirs would not be a suicide mission, a frontal assault on Julian's stronghold. It would be a ghost's war. Seraphine's grandmother's journals, the ones from the hidden compartment, contained more than just lore. They held secrets, maps of old smugglers' tunnels that ran like veins beneath the streets of Havenwood, known only to their family. They would not attack the gates. They would rise up from the very ground beneath Julian's feet. Their goal was not to rescue the prisoners by force, but to expose a tyrant on his own stage, in front of the city delegates who believed him to be their savior. The final, most dangerous piece of the plan was kill. They would have to bring the beast with them, sedated by a potent, risky concoction of Seraphine's design. During the chaos of the confrontation, she would have one chance to administer the new serum, one chance to perform the ritual, one chance to reclaim the man from the monster or die trying. It was an insane, desperate gamble, a whisper of hope against a hurricane of certainty. But it was all they had. Chapter 21. The March to Justice. The full moon hung in the cold night sky, a perfect silver disk. It seemed to watch them, a neutral observer to their desperate final gambit. The air was crisp, carrying the distant festive sounds from Havenwood. Julian's celebration, a feast to honor the man who had promised to cleanse the forest of its monsters. The irony was a bitter taste in Seraphine's mouth. Her small, broken army was assembled in the shadows at the valley's edge. A handful of werewolves, their bodies scarred but their eyes burning with a grim resolve. A beta, remade by his guilt into a symbol of fierce loyalty. And a monster. Kale's beastly form was strapped to a heavy wooden sled, a powerful sedative keeping it in a deep, twitching slumber. Its slow, rumbling breaths were a constant, terrifying reminder of what was at stake. This was their army, battered, broken, and beautiful in its defiance. Seraphine, holding a single lantern, led them to the hidden tunnel entrance, a crack in the rock face concealed by a waterfall. Her grandmother's map was clutched in her other hand, the paper soft and worn. There was no grand speech, no call to arms. There was only a shared, silent understanding. They were marching toward a battle they would likely not survive, because the alternative was to let their world be erased. The tunnels were cold and tight, smelling of damp earth and 1,000 years of forgotten history. The only sounds were their soft footsteps, the drip of water from the stone ceiling, and the low, menacing growl of the sedated beast rumbling from the sled behind them. Every scrape of the sled on stone, every shiver of the beast in its sleep, sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through Seraphine. Her fear was a living thing, a cold snake coiling in her gut. But for the first time in her life, she did not try to fight it or analyze it. She accepted it. It was fuel. It was the current that sharpened her senses and focused her mind. She was no longer just a scientist or a healer. She was a leader, guiding her people through the darkness beneath their enemies' feet. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the end. A heavy iron grate, set into the stone ceiling, was all that separated them from the world above. Through the bars, she could see the flickering torchlight of the town square. She could hear the muffled sound of a string quartet, the polite laughter of the crowd, and then a single voice, amplified and confident, rising above it all. Julian's voice. He was on a grand, decorated stage, addressing the townspeople and the visiting city delegates, his words painting a picture of a safe, prosperous future he had single-handedly secured. From her hidden vantage point, Seraphine watched the man who had destroyed her life, basking in the adoration of a crowd who had no idea of the monster that stood before them. The stage was set. The players were in position. The quiet, desperate army in the darkness held its breath, waiting for the signal to rise. Chapter 22. The Unclaimed No More. Julian stood bathed in the triumphant glow of the festival lights, his voice a smooth, convincing melody as he spoke of peace and security. The crowd was captivated. From the darkness beneath the square, Seraphine listened to the lies, the cold knot of fear in her stomach melting away, replaced by the clean, sharp edge of purpose. This was the moment. Cassian gave the signal. The werewolves exploded from the shadows, not with snarls and claws, but as a silent, disciplined force. They created a perimeter, a living wall that separated the stunned town guard from the stage. It was a perfect diversion. Amidst the confusion, Seraphine emerged from the other side of the square. She walked toward the stage, her steps calm and deliberate. The mud and tears were gone. She wore a simple, dark tunic, her hair was tied back, and her eyes held the unwavering focus of a hawk. She was not the bride they had seen dragged away in terror. She was a queen returning to claim her throne. She ascended the steps, her gaze locked on Julian, whose charming smile had finally faltered. The crowd fell silent, a collective gasp rippling through them. "You speak of monsters, Julian," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent square. "Let's talk about the truth." She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She presented evidence. She laid her grandmother's leather-bound journals on the podium for the delegates to see. She held up his coded messages to Cassian, the demand for sabotage clear and damning. Finally, she placed a vial of her own blood next to a cluster of the rare shift-neutralizing herbs. "He doesn't want to protect Havenwood," she explained, her voice ringing with undeniable truth. "He wants to commit an extinction, and he has been using my family's legacy, and my blood, to try and build his weapon." The mask of civility shattered. A vile, ugly rage twisted Julian's handsome features. "Lies!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "She is one of them, infected, a monster." He spun around and screamed an order. "Bring it out! Show them what a real monster looks like! Kill her!" Guards, loyal to him, dragged the heavy sled onto the stage. With a flick of a lever, the cage was opened. The beast that was Kale, enraged by the noise and lights, lunged out. It was a creature of pure nightmare, all matted fur and rabid red eyes. It roared, a sound of mindless agony, and charged, not at Julian, but directly at Seraphine. She didn't run. This was the nexus of it all, the culmination of her journey. She uncapped the vial of the stabilized cure. As the beast thundered toward her, she stood her ground, her heart a calm, steady drum. Her voice rang out, imbued with a power that was both ancient and new. "I claim what is mine." She didn't just jab him with the needle. As he lunged, she met him head-on, slamming the syringe into his shoulder, while her other hand pressed flat against his heart. She pushed her own life force, her own will, her own willing sacrifice into him through the dead bond. A blinding silver light erupted from her hand, engulfing them both. The beast howled, a sound that was no longer rage, but one of pure, soul-deep recognition. It convulsed, collapsing inward, the monstrous form melting away like smoke. He lay on the stage at her feet, naked, human, and whole. The dead, gray scar on his arm blazed with a brilliant, living silver light. He pushed himself up, his golden eyes clear and sane, and looked at her with a love so profound it was a physical force. The unclaimed bride had just claimed her king. Chapter 23: Echoes of the Battle. The aftermath was a symphony of chaos and revelation. Julian, sputtering threats and denials, was surrounded by the city delegates' personal guard, his face a mask of disbelief. His reign was over. The townspeople stared, their faces a mixture of terror, confusion, and dawning understanding. But Seraphine's focus was singular. Kale was alive. He was himself. He rose to his full height, a solid, protective wall at her side, his presence a warmth that chased away the last of the cold. Their bond was back, no longer a parasitic drain or a shared sentence, but a vibrant, humming circuit of power and devotion. Because of their victory, the first priority was the prisoners. The city delegates, their faces grim with the knowledge of how deeply they'd been deceived, dispatched their own men to Julian's stronghold. Soon, the captured pack members were being carried into the square. They were weak, sick with the accelerated blight, but they were alive. Seraphine, now flanked by Kale, became the calm center of the storm. She moved from one to the next, administering the cure she had created, her hands steady, her voice a soothing balm. It worked. With each dose, the feverish light in their eyes would soften, the black veins receding, the tense lines of pain easing from their faces. Amidst the tearful reunions, Cassian found his family. His young daughter, her face streaked with dirt, ran into his arms, and he buried his face in her hair, his body shaking with ragged sobs. His mate held him, their family a small, perfect island in the chaotic square. Then, his duty done as a father, he turned to his alpha. He knelt in the dirt before Kale and Seraphine, in full view of the pack and the human officials. He didn't offer excuses. He renewed his vow of loyalty, his voice thick with emotion, but clear as a bell. His allegiance was not just to his alpha, but to the healer who had shown him the meaning of true sacrifice. It was his redemption, complete and absolute. Later, as the first hints of dawn painted the sky, the lead delegate approached them. He was an older man with kind, weary eyes. "We owe you a debt that can never be repaid, Healer Seraphine," he said, his voice filled with a deep, genuine respect. "We were blind." Julian's lies were convincing. He looked from her to Kale, seeing not a monster and his keeper, but two leaders, standing as equals. "The old treaty with Havenwood is void. We would like to propose a new one, an alliance between our city and your people, one based not on fear and control, but on cooperation and mutual respect, with you, as its architect." The offer hung in the cool morning air, a promise of a future no one had dared to dream of. The long, bloody war, fought for generations in the shadows, was finally over. The daunting, beautiful work of building a new world was about to begin. Chapter 24. A new dawn. Years passed. The scars of Julian's reign faded, replaced by the vibrant tissues of a new, unified community. Havenwood was no longer just a human town bordering a forest. It was a sanctuary. The valley was no longer a hidden refuge. It was a home. A bridge, both literal and metaphorical, now spanned the river, connecting the two worlds into one. Werewolves walked the town's streets, their skills contributing to the community, and humans studied the ancient wisdom of the forest, their fears replaced by a deep and abiding respect. Seraphine stood in the great hall of the institute she had founded. It was a beautiful building of glass and living wood, part laboratory, part library, part sanctuary. Here, the precise methodologies of her science worked in harmony with the ancient, intuitive knowledge of the healer lineage. Humans and young werewolves worked side by side, creating new medicines, developing sustainable farming techniques, and forging a future that honored both their worlds. She was no longer just a botanist, a healer, or a mate. She was a bridge, a founder, a matriarch. A familiar warmth enveloped her from behind. Kale's arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He was no longer just an alpha ruling a rogue pack. He was a statesman, a leader who governed a united people with a strength that was now tempered by a profound compassion. He had learned from her that true power was not about control, but about balance. "Thinking again?" he rumbled, his voice a soft, familiar vibration against her back. She smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Just observing the results of our experiment," he chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It seems our hypothesis was correct." Their love, once a chaotic, cataclysmic event, had settled into a deep, quiet rhythm, a perfect synthesis of his primal heart and her logical mind. Later, they stood on a hill overlooking the thriving, peaceful valley. The full moon, the same moon that had once been a symbol of fear and uncontrolled transformation, now bathed their new world in a gentle silver light. Below, a new generation of healers, both human and werewolf, sat around a fire, listening to Cassian, now a respected elder, tell a story. Their own children, a boy with his father's fiercely loyal golden eyes and a girl with her mother's insatiable curiosity, played at the edge of the woods, their laughter a joyful, careless sound. Their very existence was the ultimate proof of the world they had built. Her story had become a legend. The tale of the unclaimed bride who had faced down a tyrant, who had healed a dying people, and who had not been claimed by a beast, but had, in her darkest hour, claimed a king and a destiny of her own making. Cale took her hand, his thumb stroking the beautiful, intricate silver scar on her wrist. It was no longer a mark of a bond. It was a testament, a symbol, a promise. She looked out at her world, her family, her love, and a final knowing smile touched her lips. She was home.